Hello, good evening, senior members and everyone present. You are most welcome to tonight's series on the Young Researchers Forum. Please, I hope I can be heard. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so you're all welcome to Research Cafe 5. And the topic for discussion tonight is the Ghana's greenhouse gas emission, a data-driven path to net zero. By way of, before we start the program, as usual, I would like to invite us, Sister Dr. Mrs. Bennett Akumsin to give us the opening prayer so that we can immediately. Thank you. Bennett, if you are around. Yes, I can see her.
Thank you very much, Efiba. Good evening to us all. And shall we pray? Father, we thank you so much for this evening. We thank you for bringing us together for this meeting. We thank you that we are able to learn more and be able to impact our generation and even the ones ahead. In Jesus' name have we prayed with thanksgiving. Amen.
Amen and amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Mrs. Bennett Akumsin. So by way of introduction and also to situate our discussion in context, we'll have the chairperson or the lead for the Young Research Forum in the person of Professor Marian Asantewaa Nkansah to introduce us to tonight's program and also give us the purpose of our gathering.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you're all aware, the Young Researchers Forum has been established to support the mandate of the Office of Grants and Research. And so as part of activities in realizing this mandate, we have the research cafes, which we normally do for young researchers of this university. And the research cafe is very simple, where the presenter chooses one of their papers that is of social relevance and also relevant to all other disciplines. And then they share their research findings with us. And then we have an interactive session after which we all say goodbye to each other. And this is the fifth in the series. We started with the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and then moved to the College of Built Environment, moved to the College of Health Sciences, and the last one we had was with the College of Science. And tonight is the turn of the College of Engineering. So we're very excited to be hosted by the College of Engineering. We are looking forward to
Mariana, we can't hear you, or is it only me?
Ladies and gentlemen, is my microphone on or off?
It's on. We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. Yes. So, Prof. Ncheje, my microphone is working. So tonight we are very happy that the College of Engineering is hosting us to again enlighten us on something that is useful to all of us in our livelihood. So without wasting much time, I would like to welcome you all to tonight's event and I encourage you to engage. Let us engage and then let's listen attentively and then have a good interactive session afterwards. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Professor Marian Asantewaa Nkansah. Thank you so much. Before we move on to the presentation, we'd also like to receive an opening remark from the Director of OGR, of Grants and Research. He is Professor Philip Ncheje. Prof, if you are here, can we have your opening remark?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing very well. So I thank Professor Nkansah and the team for putting this together. Climate change is, of course, one of the most significant challenges confronting us as a nation and globally. But for us, because of our the fact that our livelihoods depend on climate sensitive sectors, any slight changes in the rainfall and temperature patterns greatly affect us. And therefore, I'm excited this evening to be part of this. This is something that affects almost all of us: energy, water resources, agriculture, health, and what have you. So I encourage all of us to stay and then enjoy the conversation. I think the EPA, maybe next time when we are doing this, let's get somebody also from EPA to provide some kind of policy dimension to this. I know the EPA has done a lot of work in this direction, especially with regards to what we call the third assessment report and the fourth assessment report to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I'm hoping that our speaker this morning will do justice to that. On that note, I say thank you very much, and God richly bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you, most grateful, Professor Philip. Indeed, tonight's program or topic for discussion is crucial and a very timely one, because as a continent, we are the most vulnerable, to the threat of climate change. And even as a country, it affects us so much. So we can't just sit down and do nothing. We have to be up and about and do something about it. And tonight, there's been some work ongoing to be able to kind of quantify the amount of carbon emitted from our energy sector. We have a very seasoned researcher who has done a lot of work in this area tonight with us, and he is going to take us through the discussion. And I would want to give you a brief background of who he is and what he has been doing. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Ian Adams Sokama Newham. He's a senior lecturer and a research lead of the Net Zero Carbon Emission Lab at the Department of Petroleum Engineering. His main research interests include carbon intensity assessment of oil and gas processes and facilities, development of smart greenhouse gas emission monitoring tools, and mitigation techniques, including utilization and storage, and so many more. Some of his ongoing research projects at the lab include Net Zero Carbon Emission Project in collaboration with several institutions, including the Jensen, the Petroleum Commission, New Mexico Tech, and Petronas, with the aim of assessing greenhouse gas emission in Ghana and proposing a net zero plan for the local oil and gas industry. He has several other collaborations with different institutions and departments in and outside KNUST. Prior to his appointment at KNUST, he served as an assistant professor at the University of Stavanger in Norway. His research findings have been widely published in reputable peer-reviewed journals, reflecting his high level of expertise and contribution to the field. Dr. Adams holds a PhD and MSc in petroleum engineering from the University of Stavanger, Norway, and a BSc in the same subject from our own school, KNUST. He's done so much that I can't put here. So after the program, if you want to have further meetings with him, I suggest that you book one with him. So Doc, before I hand over to you, let me say this. You have 30 minutes to go through the presentation, after which we'll zoom into the Q&A session. But please, whilst he's talking, if you have any question, you can also put it in the chat window. I'll read it when we get into the Q&A session. So please, Doc, if you are ready, can we please have you? Hello.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Please, can I share my screen?
Yes, please, you can.
Okay. Please, can you make me the co-host? so I can share the screen.
You have the permission to share, please. So go ahead.
All right, thank you. Please, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can see.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the OGR and Young Researchers Forum for giving me this platform to share on this important topic. And also, I would like to thank all our listeners and colleagues who joined this evening to support and also to participate in this discussion. My topic today is Ghana's greenhouse gas emissions, data-driven path to net zero. I would like to spend a few minutes to look at net zero because there's a whole lot of misconception about net zero. Many people think that the government is wasting its time discussing net zero or even thinking about achieving one. People think that it may be detrimental to our development. And there are several other views out there about net zero. So net zero, what is it? And what is it not? Now, net zero is not zero emission. So that is the first thing. By net zero, we are not being asked to stop our emissions completely. We are just being asked to strive to get to a point where our emissions will be equal to our mitigation, or at least balanced by the mitigation efforts. Number two, we talk about energy transition. We don't talk about energy change. So there's no pressure on us to stop, let's say, the production and utilization of fossil fuels immediately. Okay, it's a transition. So there's going to be a long period within which we will try to transition from complete dependence on fossil fuels to other cleaner forms of energy. So there's time and there's no pressure on us. Then number three, the energy transition or attaining net zero will not pose much economic challenges to us as people view it. Okay, it comes with opportunities and challenges. Actually, it's going to be more expensive to us if we don't pursue net zero than it will be if we decide to pursue one. And this is the reason. Number one, we have signed on to the climate agreement. So we cannot go back on that. So we need to fulfill our part of it. And the government is doing well on that. We've been reporting and contributing to the accord since we signed on to it. Then, number two, the energy transition is a whole market on its own. Okay, this is a market that is valued at $40 trillion by 2030. So this is a whole economic opportunity. And if you analyze it properly, about 20% of the investment is going to go into the acquisition of materials. And these materials, over 60% of them can be found in Africa. Actually, it should be more than that. Okay. So we have the raw material that the transition will depend on. And this is a huge market. If we sit aside and decide not to pursue it, other countries will pursue it. And eventually, we will have to depend on them for both investment and technology. Okay. So it is important that we get ourselves involved, even regardless of the pace, so that we get to also benefit from these markets. Then number three, nowadays, if you are looking for investment, investors want to be sure that their money is going into countries where the government is climate sensitive. Okay. So if we are not pursuing net zero, we are telling the whole world that we are not part of the energy transition, and government will struggle to attract investment into certain aspects of our economy. So because of this, net zero is very important to us as a country. Actually, these are not all the reasons, but for the sake of time, I'm going to limit it to this. So because of these and many other reasons, net zero is very important to us. Now, the government has made a commitment last year that as a country, we want to achieve net zero by 2070 in its energy transition framework. They also mentioned or outlined some of the activities that we are planning as a country to put in place for us to achieve that. But a framework is not a roadmap. A framework just gives an idea of what you want to do as a country to achieve net zero by a certain timeline. And we have achieved that. We've done that. We as researchers want to look deeply into that and see if the suggestions are backed by data. And if they are not, which other suggestions can we also give as researchers to the government to help the country pursue net zero emissions? So that is my topic this evening, and I'll delve right away into it. As we have discussed in a few minutes ago, climate change is now the biggest threat to global health and security. Africa's contribution to climate change in terms of greenhouse gas emission is very small, about 3%. Okay, if you combine North America, Europe, and Asia alone, they account for about 80%. So relatively, we are not contributing much to greenhouse gas emissions. But it is in our best interest to take or to consider reducing our emissions because we are the receiving end of its effects. We are the receiving end of its effects because our lives, okay, most aspects of our life depend on activities that are climate dependent, notably agriculture. And number two, as a continent, we don't have the resources required to respond adequately to the impacts of climate change. So we are the least resource, and we're also at the receiving end. Because if you look at our climate, you look at our environment, the heat, and all that, we are at the point where it should be in our best interest to look into this. Now, Ghana, like other sub-Saharan African countries, has been greatly impacted. Okay, the literature has it that for the past century, our temperature has gone up by 1 degree C. We can all observe the changing rainfall patterns. Our coastal communities are being displaced. We've lost biodiversity. And there are numerous health challenges in our society that can be attributed to the impact of climate change. Now, because of this, we need to treat climate change as a very important part of our lives. Now, climate change is driven by emission of greenhouse gases, okay? And mostly through human activities, activities that we humans do that releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Some of the common greenhouse gases that we know are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. Now, CO2 is the most significant or abundant greenhouse gas that we produce through anthropogenic means or human activity. But methane has about 25 times the global warming potential of CO2, and nitrous oxide has over 200 times the global warming potential of CO2. So all these gases are quite very important. And if you are in the oil and gas industry, actually methane is one of the most significant greenhouse gases that we produce. And so we pay a lot of attention to it as well. Now, globally, the energy sector alone is responsible for about 76% of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, that is followed by the agriculture sector, which contributes about 12%, The industrial sector, 6%, land use and forestry, 3%, and waste management, 3%. If you come to Ghana, because we are largely dependent on agriculture and also we are at an early stage of our development, most of our greenhouse gases, according to the EPA, is still coming from the agriculture sector. So agri, forestry, and land use is contributing about 54%, immediately followed by the energy sector, which contributes about 36% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in our country. That is followed by industry, it's followed by waste management, 8%, and then finally industry, 2%. Because we are a developing country and our development and sectors of our economy are going to evolve over time, this dynamics will change in a few years. Let's say in the next 10 years, as we strive to industrialize and diversify our economy, definitely we are going to end up conforming to the global dynamics that I have just shown. Now, in the energy transition framework that was published last year in 2022, Ghana aims boldly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 15% by 2030, with an ambitious goal to attain net zero by 2070. This wasn't imposed on us. Okay? We made a decision, we sat down, looked at our resources, and then we decided that this is the contribution we want to make to the Paris Agreement. By 2070, we want to get to a point where our emissions will be balanced by mitigation. And we went ahead and outlined the activities that, or the mitigation techniques that we believe we can put in place to achieve this. Now, an important gap in this country's climate action is the lack of reliable tools for monitoring and forecasting future emissions. First, we need to know our emissions for sure. We need to know where our greenhouse gases are coming from, the quantities, their distribution, and how this is going to change in the near future. There are several tools for predicting greenhouse gas emissions, but it is not all these tools that can be used appropriately. And most of the time, they are not used in the right context. Okay? So we went ahead to try some models from machine learning, because for developing countries like us, where we don't have so much resources for climate-related activities, we need to look for cheaper tools as researchers that we can use to get good insight into our emission dynamics. And your ability to monitor and forecast greenhouse gas emission, at least into the near future, is very important, because you need to prepare resources and also understand how things are going to change so that you can respond to it appropriately. As a country where our resources are short, you don't want things to take you by surprise. You want to have a fair idea, even no matter how crude it is, so that you can prepare adequately towards the future. Globally, machine learning has been used extensively to predict greenhouse gas emissions in various aspects of the economy in different countries. The ARIMA model has been used to examine short-term forecasting of greenhouse gas emissions from different sectors. I've listed the researchers here. These three researchers have looked into that. The GRAY model, I'll explain a bit about these models later. The GRAY model and the ARIMA model together have been used in forecasting energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. The support vector machine, artificial neural networks, and deep learning have all been used to study and predict CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, and fluorinated gas emissions in different countries. So there are several of these models out there that have been used. So we reviewed the literature extensively, and then these are our research objectives. Number one, we want to analyze fuel consumption and the corresponding greenhouse gas emission data in Ghana from 1990 to 2016, with special focus on the energy sector. Number two, we want to develop machine learning-based predictive models to monitor fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions in the energy sector of Ghana. And then number 3, we want to reliably forecast fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emission up to the year 2030, because as a country, we have a goal to reduce our emission by 15% by 2030. So that's a good benchmark we can use for our studies. And that's what we focus on. The data that was used are mainly from Ghana's 4th National Greenhouse Gas Inventory Report from the EPA. Since 1990, Ghana has meticulously reported our greenhouse gas emissions. Not so many countries can boast of the same. So this is a great feat that we are all proud of, that we started collecting our greenhouse gas emission data, and we have been reporting and contributing to various climate accords. So we have available data that we can look at. We also use the National Energy Statistics from the Energy Commission. Okay. The forecasting models that we selected based on the literature that we reviewed are the autoregressive integrated moving average, the ARIMA model for short, and the conventional gray model, GM11 for short. Okay. Now, these models will need to be evaluated. We need to have a scale for comparing them to see which model will be more effective for us as a country in terms of our data, so we can select the right model for forecasting our emissions. So the performance evaluation, the performance metrics that we use were the mean absolute error, the mean absolute percentage error, MAPE for short, and then the root mean squared error, RMSE. Now, because most of us are not engineers, I'm not going to spend too much time on the models, but if anyone is interested, we can have a discussion on that. The ARIMA model is a time series model, okay, often used for forecasting and analyzing data that exhibit temporal dependency and trends. Okay, this model consists of 3 components. Okay, we have the autoregressive component, the differencing component, and the moving average component. So it's usually represented as ARIMA PDQ, where the P, D, and Q are parameters. Okay. The ARIMA model has a single dependent variable, usually YT. And this dependent variable is actually a function of past values of the same dependent variable and an error term. Okay. So that is how the equation looks. The gray model is a type of gray system model used for forecasting and analyzing time series data. The power of the gray model lies in its ability to give good prediction, even with less amount of data. And since we have collected data only from 1990, actually we don't have a lot of data compared to other countries. So we needed to look at a model that is capable of giving good prediction with less amount of data. And in some cases, some of the data were also missing. And the good, one of the power about the gray model is that it's able to handle cases where the data is incomplete. Okay. The gray model incorporates first order accumulation and first order discrete time derivative operations. Now, what is important here is that the gray model consists of 2 parts. The original data sequence, that is the data that you give to it, the original data sequence. And then the accumulated generation operation, the algo. Okay, the algo is used to transform the original data sequence into an accumulated sequence. And this accumulated sequence captures the accumulated values of the data. So that is basically what these models are all about. Now, a little bit about the performance statistics. Okay, so the mean absolute error. Basically, the closer the value is to 0, the more desirable. Okay, but the performance metric that is of greater significance when it comes to predictions of this nature is the MAPE, okay, the mean absolute percentage error. And there's a scale called the Lewis scale. The Lewis scale actually gives us a yardstick for identifying when a model is giving good prediction, giving high accuracy prediction, good forecast, reasonable forecast, or inaccurate forecast. So the forecast is taken to be accurate, if the value of the MAPI is less than 10%. It is good forecast if it is between 10 and 20%. It's reasonable if it is between 20 and 30%. And the forecast is inaccurate if the MAPI value is greater than or equal to 30%. Then we also have the RMSE. Also, the value ranges, each value ranges from 0 to infinity. But of course, the most desirable is the lower values compared to the larger values. Now, this was how the models were developed. Okay? The data set is usually split into training and testing data using the 80-20 proportion. So this is a tradition in machine learning. Sometimes we use different ratios, but this is what we used in this study, and it was adequate. Okay, so this is followed by a sequence of computations to determine the model parameters. In terms of the ARIMA, there are 3 parameters that we need. We need the P, D, and Q. Okay, so the autocorrelation and partial autocorrelation functions, we use that to determine the parameters P and Q. Then we set an appropriate value of D to achieve stationarity. Now, when it comes to the Gray model, we need to solve the Gray differential equation. And when you solve the Gray differential equation, it gives you a model that you can use readily to get the AGO, the accumulated part of the data, and then you use that to get the prediction. So the training data was used in determining the model parameters, after which the models were then tested using the test data. Now we need to see how these models perform relatively. So we use 2 different data sets. We use the energy sector emissions from Ghana, and then we use the transport sector emissions data. We train the model, use the model for prediction, and then we try to look at the 3 performance metrics that we consider: the MAE, the MAPE, and then RMSE. And if you look at the figure here, it is quite clear that the Gray model showed superior prediction performance in all the 3 metrics. It has lower errors in both cases that were considered, both in the energy sector, the total energy sector emissions, and also the transport sector emissions. Now, considering the MAPI, which I said was quite very important when it comes to predictions of this nature, generally the Gray model produced high accuracy because you can see that the values are generally less than 10%. The ARIMA model similarly gave good accuracy, adequate accuracy, because the values are between 20 and 10%. This value is less than 20%. This value is also less than 20%, but they are all within the range that can be used for prediction and forecasting. Now, we try to look at another way of evaluating the performance of these 2 models. So we trained the model this time with the total energy sector emissions, and then we validated the model with the transport sector greenhouse gas emission data. We plotted the predicted emissions against the actual emissions in a plot called the equiline plot. Okay, the equiline plot shows the fit of the predicted greenhouse gas emission data to the actual reported greenhouse gas emission data, as you can see. Now, the data points should align more or closer to the 45-degree line that we can see here, the red line. If the prediction is accurate, so the more the data is aligned to this 45-degree line, the more accurate the predictions will be. And as you look at them, the first one here is considering the ARIMA model. And then the second, which is figure B, shows the predictions or the forecasting done with the Gray model. So as you can see, you have the data aligning more the 45-degree line here in B compared to A, showing again that the Gray model gives better performance prediction compared to the ARIMA model.
Hello, Dr. Yen.
Now,
hello.
yes, please.
Yeah, so you have
Yes.
5 minutes. So if you can work within the time for us, so you can have more time for our audience. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, I have a lot to cover, but maybe I will need to move a bit faster.
Yeah, so we'll come back to the slides during the Q&A. We can take you back anytime. So if you can.
Okay, so this analysis of energy and fuel consumption, if you look at the blue line here shows the total energy consumption from the year 2000 to 2019, and then the black line is petroleum consumption. The red line or curve is transport sector energy consumption. Now, if you consider these data, the total energy consumption in Ghana increased by 64% between the years under consideration here. Okay? But within this same period, the population of Ghana increased by 60%. Okay? And our average GDP grew by 24%. So if you have more people, there's going to be more communities being powered, and we are going to use more energy. If your economic activities go up, you need more energy to sustain it. So that justifies the energy consumption here. Actually, we are consuming far less energy compared to the countries that we aspire to be. So if we actually want to grow as a country, we need to consume more energy. But one insight here is that over 70% of the liquid petroleum products that were imported in this period were consumed by the transport sector. So most of our petroleum products are going into driving of cars and in moving goods and services and stuff like that. Now, this is analysis of greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 to 2016. Now, if you look at this data, we have the total energy sector greenhouse gas emissions, and then we have the transport sector emission in blue. Okay? Between 1990 and 2016, this data shows that our emissions, actually the total emissions, energy-related emissions increased by 303%, with an annual growth rate of 12%. This can be split into two different parts. Okay? The emissions rate has been slightly lower than the 12% average between the years 1990 and 2005, and higher than the average value after 2005. Globally, okay, the greenhouse gas emission of any country depends on four main factors. It depends on the population growth, the GDP per capita, the energy intensity of our activities, the emissions produced by energy generation and consumption technology. Okay? So we decided to investigate these equations to see if it actually describes our emissions. So here, we plotted the emissions per capita. That is how our emissions are changing with population growth as a function of the year. Okay? And this is what you see here. So although if you look at this data, although the emissions per capita of Ghana was low generally compared to other countries, both the total energy-related greenhouse gas emissions and transport sector emissions have increased consistently with population growth as expected. Then we went ahead to look at the emissions per GDP, how our emissions, whether the activities that produces our greenhouse gases are bringing some productive activities into the stream, or they are just nuisance activities that we are engaged in that is producing the greenhouse gases. Okay, so if you look at this, you see that initially our emissions per GDP grew. Okay, it reached a certain peak and now it is dropping. It is. So if you look at this, you can split it into three parts. Between 1990 and 2003, emissions rate exceeded growth rate. Between 2003 and 2008, growth rate exceeded emission rate. And between 2008 and 2016, emissions have been consistent with growth. So we are at a point where most of our emissions are coming from activities that are contributing positively to our economy. So this is good for us as a country. Then we went ahead to look at the forecast. Okay, now this is a business as usual scenario forecast. We haven't considered any policy that the government have implemented since 2016, because most of these policies are initial stages. Okay? So we just looked at the data that and assume that the same reform that took us from, let's say, between the year 2000 to 2016 is going to continue up to 2030. Now, this is forecasting of fuel consumption. If you look at the data, this was forecasted using the gray model. Fuel consumption could grow to about 106% by 2030 compared to the 2016 benchmark. This is the total greenhouse gas emission from the energy sector, okay, forecasted with both the ARIMA and the gray model. The gray model gives slightly higher prediction compared to the ARIMA, and we know that the gray model's prediction is actually more accurate compared to the ARIMA. But in general, the total energy-related greenhouse gas emissions will increase by 131% by 2030 compared to 2016 benchmark. This is transport sector emissions. Okay, transport sector emissions through the prediction show that the emissions could increase by about 219% by 2030 compared to the 2016 benchmark. Now, these values are still generally low compared to many countries. So it isn't that we are making these predictions to discredit government or to discredit ourselves as a country, but we need to know how our emission is growing and how things are going to change. Now, these are some policy recommendations we have for the government. First, we've seen that our fuel consumption is going to double by 2030. Now, we as a country are at the point where we import most of our petroleum products from other countries. These countries increasingly are changing and moving away from fossil fuels. Most of them are betting on electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. Okay, so in the near future, those countries are not going to be so much into fossil fuels, but we will still rely on it up to maybe the near future. So we need to pursue energy independence as a country where we can refine our own fuel, and we don't have to depend on other countries. Our dependence on fossil fuel will at least grow beyond 2030 because we don't have, right now, we haven't put in enough infrastructure to transition to other forms of transportation. We are also advocating that government should prioritize simple and attainable solutions to combat transport sector emissions. Transport sector emissions is going to grow by over 300%. We depend on cars for transportation. Our cars are pretty old. Our roads are not so good. So the fuel consumed per kilometer is very high, which makes our emission per kilometer of transportation also very high. So for us to reduce transport sector emissions, we are not yet at a point where many people can afford electric vehicles. It's a good thing to invest into electric cars. It's a good thing to invest into nitrogen. The government has put in its energy transition framework that by 2040, we will be at a point where we will implement hydrogen as a national fuel. And also we can depend solely on natural gas for energy generation. But we are not there yet, okay? We can still do something about our emissions. We can prioritize policies that will help people to acquire newer vehicles. We can prioritize policies that encourage mass transportation. We can also look at policies that will help us to improve our roads, so that road and traffic, so that people spend less time on the road, consuming less fuel per kilometer, and of course, reducing emission per kilometer. These are things that are attainable. Then we should probably also consider biofuel. The biofuel market is worth about 117 billion. Okay, now many countries are going into biofuel, and biofuel is very expensive. Okay, as a country, we have arable land, we have huge, vast agricultural land that we can produce the feedstock required for biofuel production. The Department of Chemical Engineering here has been producing biofuel for a very long time, even before I came to this university. Okay, so we have the technology to do it. As a country, if we see this as something that we can invest in, I think we can encourage the oil marketing companies to blend fossil fuel with biofuel, and this will reduce emissions significantly, even if we are not able to change our cars as we expect to do. Okay. Government should also prioritize carbon capture and utilization, okay, as the main decarbonization solution for the energy sector, not carbon capture, utilization, and storage. These are two different things, okay? Carbon capture and storage require you to capture CO2, transport it, and inject it into underground storage facilities, rocks. That is something that as a country we are not prepared for yet. Number one, our emission is not so high. We don't have high point source emissions where we can capture large quantities of CO2 for transport and storage. Number two, the infrastructure required to build a CCUS facility is quite very high, so we are not there yet. And then also, CCS is in such a way that, first of all, you need to find geological storage facilities that are capable of holding large quantities of CO2 safely and securely. And as a country, we have 4 bases, geological bases, very big ones, but they've not been assessed. So we don't know the ability to store CO2. That is something that we need to work on before we get to that point. But we can consider capturing CO2 and utilizing it to produce other products that will even generate business and employment opportunities for other people and our young people. Okay? So that is doable. By so doing, we are building capacity in CO2 capture, because CO2 capture takes about 70% of the total cost of carbon capture, utilization, and storage. If we are able to build that capacity, then it will reduce our cost significantly when we get to the point where we want to implement CCS. Okay, so these are some basic suggestions that we are making for government to consider. Now, the following are some key findings of the work. My time is fast spent. We found out that the GRAY model could be used for prediction and forecasting of greenhouse gas emission in Ghana. Between 1990 and 2016, petroleum fuel consumption increased by about 64.5%, with a corresponding increase of about 303% of the absolute greenhouse gas emissions. By 2030, fuel consumption could hit 106% increase compared to 2016 benchmark. The greenhouse gas emission correspondingly will be increased by about 131% compared to the 2016 benchmark. Transport sector emission is a big deal for us. That is going to be increased by about 290% according to our forecast compared to the 2016 benchmark. Now, we propose once again that government should look at attainable goals. Okay, it is good to invest into advanced decarbonization technology. We need to build that capacity to partake in the energy transition market, which is huge and coming with a lot of opportunities. But let's also focus on simple, attainable solutions that can reduce our emissions significantly. Now, in this research, we did not consider the policies outlined in the Ghana Energy Transition Framework in 2022. We have ongoing research right now that is solely dedicated to that. So in future, maybe I could return here with another update if there's time. Thank you very much. I think I've exceeded my time, so I'm sorry about that. But thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this. I'll be standing by for questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Doc. And you have taken almost 10 minutes of my time. But these are some very interesting values you are seeing tonight in terms of energy consumption, GHG emission, and how they are changing over time. And I know most people have questions, and so without wasting time, I'd like to open the floor for questions, contributions, clarifications, and any other thing. So please, let's keep going. The floor is open for Q&A. So let me see. All right, so there's a question in the chat box. It says that the ARIMA and the GM are empirical models. If this is correct, and let me see, if this is correct, are there chances of using machine learning models with your data, and how do you account for uncertainties? This is from Vincent.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the use of machine learning, I've also showed in my slide here, there are researchers who have used different machine learning models. So I think I'll go back. So we can look at that. Different machine learning models have been used. So yeah, so if you look at these researchers, Baquet, they have used the support vector machine, artificial neural network, and deep learning in forecasting greenhouse gas emissions. So that is doable. We selected these models because generally they have been used extensively in forecasting energy sector emissions, and they actually give very good accuracy. We have tried the artificial neural network. They didn't give us the same level of accuracy compared to the gray model. So it's doable. And for accounting for uncertainty, yeah, that's why we have the performance metrics. The uncertainty in the data, unfortunately, we might not be able to do much about that. There's uncertainty in the data. This data, we do not know for sure how they were collected, whether they were collected according to the IPCC standards or not. But these are data that have been reported by the EPA. So we believe that this data is credible. And also the rest of the data is coming from the Energy Commission. And we believe that they are credible, but there should be uncertainties in there, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Doc. Please, any more questions? If you have a question, please put up your hand so that I can call you to ask your question. All right, Jack, your hand is up. Please ask your question.
To clarify the whole implementation of your data analysis with regards to the training and the testing data. Were the data randomly sampled? Please, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, the data,
were the
the
data
were
randomly sampled?
Yes, they were randomly sampled.
Okay, so in that case, the graphs that you showed, I don't know whether you can, there you had some bar charts you showed earlier on.
Yes.
Yes, I want to know, was it just for a single run of the training and the testing data after random sampling? There were some bar charts.
Okay, yeah. You mean the metrics?
Yes, yeah. Was it just done
Yes.
for, let's say, a single, after randomly sampling your data set to get your training and testing? Yes. Is the analysis based on only that particular one? Or
yes, it's based on one data.
Several...
No, it's based on two data sets. So we have data set. The first data set is total energy sector emissions. And then the second data set is completely different. That is the transport sector emissions.
Okay, I just wanted to know how sensitive your developed model is to the randomness in the data that is in your training or test. Because this same work can be given to somebody, and whatever data is in the training might be different from your training data. So how sensitive is the model to the data that exists in your test data and then the training? And how does it affect your hyperparameters for the ARIMA model? You said you had to tune the D value. There was a D value you were tuning. So you realize in this case, if your data changes, I mean, your training data changes or your test data changes slightly, the D value might also change slightly. So I was thinking you could report, for these graphs, you could report something like an average value if you were supposed to repeat the model for a certain number of times. It will give us more, it will answer the uncertainty question the earlier guy asked about how uncertain your model is.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is a very genuine contribution. Unfortunately, we didn't do that, but we sampled the data randomly, and we did that severally. Each time, I think we were getting very close values. So this wasn't run only once; it was run severally to get with the two different data sets.
Okay, then if it was run severally, then it would be better to report on the mean values and maybe a certain dispersion around the mean.
All right, thank you so much.
Then you also have another graph, I think ahead of you from this slide. There's a graph showing the
equiline plot.
Yeah, this one. I think it's a very good graph, but it would be better to tell us in fact the ratio, the predictive ratio. At the end of the day, you want everything to fall along the 45-degree line, right?
Sure.
But then what is the ratio? I mean, your prediction against your actual. You can tell us probably it's 1.0, which means it's actually the same. And then you give us something like the coefficient of variation around it, just to give us a scientific perspective of it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Then my last question, you had your forecasting. I think there's another graph earlier on. There's another one ahead.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, good. So your models were supposed to predict from, I think, 2020 to 2030, right?
Yes.
Or 2015.
No, 2016. 2016 to 20, yeah, 2016 to 2030.
I was thinking, it's just a suggestion that for us to really know whether your models you develop are actually performing well, why don't you start this particular graph, why don't you start from the whole model? Let's see the prediction from 1990 to 2016 before you kickstart your prediction.
All right. Actually, I have drafts that were done that way. I could have just put them here. So it isn't a big deal. But for the publication, I think this is usually the practice for publishing this kind of work. So that's why I did it. But I have drafts where we fit the data from 1990 upwards.
Okay. I'm done. Thank you. And a good work done.
Thank you, George. Can we have Dr. Amponsah?
All right, thank you very much. And yeah, I think that was a great presentation. I have a few observations. I think the previous questioner asked most of my questions. And in relation with the ARIMA model, did you look at the trend? Because, ARIMA model, if you're not careful and you don't check the stationarity or the non-stationarity of your data, you might be mistaken, because usually it's applied for situation where the data is non-stationary in terms of the mean. So that's the first question. Did you check the trend?
Yes, we did.
You did?
Yes.
And so far as population is increasing, definitely there will be some increasing trend in there.
Exactly.
Okay. Good. My second question, which is more of a comment, and I really want to know your opinion on that. You are recommending that we should be leaning towards more of renewable energy. I'm a great believer of climate change. I think the climate is changing, whether naturally or anthropogenically. The climate is changing. But do you think in terms of developing countries like Africa, we are not even contributing to about 2% of the global emissions? And we all understand that the causes of climate change is global, but the effects are localized. Do you think Africa, we should be focusing our attention on more of mitigation or adaptation? Because if we want to develop, to be frank with you, and we channel all our energy into renewable energy systems, and there's a lot of evidence in developed countries that they develop through non-renewable energy sources. China is even China is a developed country, as we know, but they are still classified under developing country because now they've been exempted from Kyoto Protocol to all the Copenhagen Agreement and all that in terms of how they can cut their emissions. So do you think countries like Ghana, we should be focusing more on mitigation of climate in terms of emissions, or we should be focusing on adapting to reality? Because the cause of climate change is global. It doesn't really matter how much we are not even emitting as relevant as some of these countries. But the effect, as we can feel it in agriculture, in our energy sector, in our environment and everything, should be focusing more on mitigation strategies or looking more at adaptation strategy, because I believe we have to adapt to it. But I really want your opinion on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. This is a very genuine question. But my initial response would be that we need to focus on both. Now, I'm going to explain a bit about that. In terms of adaptation, we really need to invest a lot into adaptation, because we are at a point that we already started experiencing the impact. So we need to adapt. But also, we need to look at mitigation. And before my presentation, I said that the reason why we need to look at mitigation is not just because we are contributing a lot into the system. In terms of our energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, we are actually consuming very less amount of energy and emitting far less greenhouse gases compared to countries that have similar population size as ours. But the reason why we need to consider mitigation is because, first of all, we have signed on to the Climate Accord, which compels us to make a contribution in terms of mitigation. Then, number two, I said that the energy transition market is worth billions of dollars. Okay, in terms of developing technology for mitigation, Africa has over 60% of the material, the raw material. So are we just going to sit here and sell raw materials again? Or we will go into development of technology and then use that to serve ourselves and also export the rest? Or we can also sit here, others will invest into the energy transition, they will develop the mitigation techniques, and then in future, if we get to a point where our emission is now quite high, we will have to import technology and beg for investment again. And then finally, no investor wants to put his money into a country where they are not talking about climate change mitigation. And government needs investors in every aspect of our economy. So we need to define some commitment, okay, climate commitment in terms of mitigation. Even if the pace is slow, we need to show some commitment in doing that. And the advanced countries are not putting pressure on us to go at the same pace as they are going, because they know that our emissions are quite low, and also we don't have the same resources that they have. Okay, but we need to make a commitment to do both. Probably we need to focus more on adaptation, because life depends on that right now, whilst also we look at mitigation within the short to medium term.
Just a quick follow-up. Sorry, yeah. But I really think all the agreement we've signed, we are not compelled to cut our, our emissions and all that, because from the Kyoto Protocol, from the Copenhagen 2009 agreement, from the Paris 2015 agreement, we are not compelled. We are just encouraged. But I think the developing countries are actually, we call something carbon market, the offsetting and all that. So they want to use developing countries as maybe their sink, where they invest in us to cut our emissions, and then they can emit more for their development, right? Yeah. So this is something we really have to take it, because they are investing a lot in, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa, in Southern Asia, Southern America, and what they are doing is they are using that to offset their emission cuts. So what it means is they give us money, and then they can emit more and develop more at the expense of some of us. So I think personally, we should be focusing more on adaptation. Yeah. Like, because the whole of Africa, we are not even emitting like 2% of the global emissions. So no matter how much we try to cut our emissions, the effect of climate change, because these developed countries are still emitting, we will still face it as it is. So it's not going to make any difference. But I think it's in academia and research, it's a good idea, but I'm looking at the practicality of this whole thing, right? And I think from me, I think thank you very much for your answer to my question. But that was just a submission I want to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your submission. But actually, it is practical. It is not just academia. It is very practical because emission reduction is not just limited to, let's say, carbon capture and storage. Afforestation and reforestation that you just mentioned are all emission reduction technologies. Okay, so they are all part, and they are practical because government made about $500 million last year planting trees alone, and that is part of greenhouse gas mitigation. And I am talking more about us taking advantage of the opportunities that are coming up, not necessarily just cutting down on our emissions, but we need to be involved in developing the technology required for it, because the materials are right here. We can't sit here for them to come take the materials to go develop their countries again, and we contribute nothing in terms of technology.
John Wobble, your hand is up. You can ask your question.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. Dr. Adams, please, you mentioned about carbon dioxide capture. And then we use diesel engines almost every day, and we are really emitting carbon dioxide. And we are finding ways to get into the use of solar, but the energy requirement is not permitting us. So I think the CO2 capture is a good idea to support us, but I don't know how we can achieve that. I learned we need some machines that can really capture those CO2 from the atmosphere. So if that's possible, I would like to know. Thank you.
All right. Please, currently, the option that we have is direct air capture. So after the emission, you could develop an equipment or a tool that you can put somewhere to pick the CO2 directly from the atmosphere. And because the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is very low, you need to be able to pump air, a lot of air into this system for a little amount of CO2 to be absorbed. And it takes a lot of energy to get that done. So currently, direct air capture is not even a very practical option for CO2 capture. So for transportation, such as cars and let's say diesel cars and all that you mentioned, we actually don't have a very practical tool for capturing CO2 directly from cars, apart from the direct air capture.
Okay, thank you.
The CO2 capture that can be done right now is from point source emissions, such as cement factories, petrochemical factories, and those heavy duty factories where CO2 is emitted in large quantities. Then you can develop a technology that is easy to use, and you can capture large amounts of those CO2. You can transport it for storage or to a plant where it can be utilized for another product.
John, are you okay with the response? If you are, then I'll move on to the next.
Please.
All right. So I can see Professor Phillips in JJ's hand up. Prof, if you are still there, can we have your question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And thank you very, very much, Dr. Adam, for that wonderful presentation. I actually enjoyed it. I was meant to be coming to the house from the office, but I stayed to listen to this. I want to find out, have you been working with the EPA or the Ministry of Energy? That's the first question. And then I want to make some contribution to the question by Dr. Amponsah. The Paris Climate Agreement of 2015 replaced the UNFCCC of a sort. The the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the Kyoto Protocol, required that countries did ABCD. It's more like a top-down approach. So, and it wasn't working. That was why in 2015, the United Nations decided that we'll go with this bottom-up approach, where countries, based on their circumstances, will present what they want to do with regards to mitigation and adaptation action. Ghana submitted our, what we call NDCs, National Determined Contribution, in 2015, and then we were required to revise this in 2021. In this, we've made very clear our commitment in terms of adaptation and mitigation actions. However, I need to also point out that for mitigation, most of the things that we said are contingent on our ability to obtain international support in terms of funding and technology to be able to do that. When it comes to adaptation, and I must admit that I was very heavily involved in this. In terms of adaptation, we identify, I think, 7 sectors, including energy, water, agriculture, health, transport, and others, where we think that we can make a lot of inroads in adaptation. Again, we also need some kind of support. And the government over the years has implemented a number of programs, projects aimed at encouraging or building adaptive capacity for our various stakeholders to be able to adapt to climate change. So I need to point out that both mitigation and adaptation efforts are encouraged. However, my personal view, and this is my personal view, will be that I feel that in as much as we try to engage in mitigation efforts, we will be better off if we concentrate and focus more on adaptation. I mean, this has been a lot of contention whenever we've had COP, that is Conference of Parties, where the developing countries will argue that we need support in terms of addressing some of the challenges imposed by climate change, because we haven't contributed so much to this the causes of this. So I want to suggest that as a country, I mean, we are doing so well when it comes to fulfilling our international commitment in terms of signing this agreement. But let me also add that, William, Dr. Mponza, we have signed and ratified these agreements. We are so good at this. And once you sign and ratify some of these agreements, even though you are not compelled to do that, I mean, you are sort of, you need to implement programs and actions so as to be able to address or meet the commitment that you have signed. But my personal view will be that I think we'll be better off if we engage our energies into adaptation and then do whatever we can do with regards to mitigation, carbon trading, and the rest. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you
very much. Doug, do you want to respond to that, or should we?
Yes, I think the first part, he asked if we were collaborating with the EPA and the Energy Commission. Yes. Actually, we have reached out to them, and we hope that we will get a stronger commitment. But for now, we don't have any strong collaboration going on between us and the EPA. So if he can help us to facilitate something, we will really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean that would be good. Let's talk. And I know the guy who is the mitigation contact person at EPA, and then maybe I can introduce you to. So I mean, let's talk offline and then. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Right. Before I hand over to Jumesi and Williams, there's a question in the chat I'd like you to address. Someone wants to know whether she can focus on carbon capture and its utilization or she'd rather focus on finding methods to reduce the amount of greenhouse emissions. She says that she's a young engineering student, and she needs to know which way to go, whether to focus on carbon capture or methods to reduce the amount of greenhouse emission.
Actually, the first option is to reduce emissions. Because if you reduce emissions, then your mitigation cost is reduced significantly. Okay, but the challenge is often that you are not able to reduce your emissions below a certain threshold. Okay, for example, globally, about 70% of the energy system can actually be transitioned to renewable forms. But about 36%, very close to that, is very difficult to decarbonize, especially the heavy-duty factories and industries. It is very difficult to decarbonize them. So if you want to reduce emissions in that case, you need to mitigate because there isn't too much that you can do. Okay, so the first option is to reduce emissions. That is why the suggestions that are made here were on reducing the fuel consumed per kilometer from in the transport sector. Okay, if you are able to reduce the fuel consumed, automatically you reduce the emissions. So that is the first place to start from before you even think about maybe bringing in electric cars and maybe hydrogen vehicles and all that, which government has committed in its transition framework that is going to implement in the year 2070. So every technology I've talked about here is government transition framework. Okay, by 2040, government is aiming to implement carbon capture and storage. As of today, I don't know if we have done much about it, but these things are all spelled in there. We will drive hydrogen vehicles around the same time, according to the transition framework. We will implement electric vehicles in mass, okay, in mass scale. By that time, it is all in the transition framework. So what are we doing about it? Okay, we have made a commitment, we want to go into that. There has to be development of technology. So that is where we are coming
in. I hope that answers your question. But if you want to follow up with another question, please feel free to do so. And let me now call Dr. Chumesi to also ask his question.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is, what can Africa do to help other continents? As Dr. Mbosa was saying, we are contributing even less than 4% of the world's CO2 emissions. And when you look at this, trying to reduce 4% will still do nothing, with Asia contributing more than even 53% of the world's emission. Like when you look at, in terms of rural electrification, you realize that Europe and other things, trying to help Africa, try to electrify all our places, all villages and other things, because maybe it was lacking in Africa. Is Africa not in the position to also help other continents to also reduce the emissions? Because what we are trying to do will have little effect. So can't we also get proposals, get, let me say, as in projects which are targeting, let's say your target is, say, to the US, helping US reduce their emission, as let's say they will help us electrify our villages. What can Africa do? Or is it that we don't have the capacity? That's the question. Thank you.
Okay, this is a brilliant question. Actually, I think I've spoken about it already, but since you've asked, I'm going to repeat the same answer that I gave. The reason why we are looking at mitigation is not because our emission is so high. Already I've shown here that our emissions are quite very low compared to other developed countries. Also, our fuel consumption is far low compared to many developed countries. So we need to consume more fuel, actually, if we want to develop to that extent, because we need to expand our economy, and that comes by consuming more energy. But the reason why it is important for Africa to invest into the development of emission mitigation technology is because, number one, we have the resources here. The materials to develop the technology are all here. Okay, so if we build capacity in using those materials, then the developed countries who need assistance can actually get it from us. They can get the raw materials. They can also get technology from us. Okay, we sit down here. We have the sun, for example, and we are at the receiving end of solar energy. Okay, in Africa, we have about, let's say, 1% of the solar fraction in the global energy mix. But we have all the resources here. The resources required to build the panels and everything are here. Okay, so we'll sit here. We have all the materials and resources. The developed countries will work on them. They will invest heavily, and they are investing heavily every year into research and development in that area. They are building technology. They will come back here, take all the resources to go and build the technology. There's going to be a day that our emissions will be as high as theirs today, because we are going to grow. Our population will grow. Our economy will grow. Okay, so there's going to be a day where we'll be like Singapore. We all believe that. That's why we are working. We know that we can build our country to that level. So when we get to that point, we will need to implement all these technologies that we say we don't need today. At that time, are we now going to start developing them? That is the question. Okay, so it's not about our emissions today. Okay, and then finally, if we sit down here and our only argument is that we have contributed less to climate change, so we won't get involved in fighting it, we don't have a good argument. Okay, it's like, let's say we have a group, and in the group, one day we wake up and one person became very rich. And after he became very rich, he made rules that none of us can do business again. And all of us sign on to that rule that really we won't do business again. And then the next day we are crying and say, you have become very rich before you made us sign. You have not been fair to us. Okay, that is not a wise argument in the first place. Okay, so it is not a good argument for us to say that we are emitting less, so we shouldn't contribute in terms of reducing emissions. No one will listen to us in that way, because we have already agreed that it is important to mitigate, and we have signed on to it. So the best we can do is to take advantage of the market and try to make the most out of it. And that is the point that we are trying to make.
Yes, please. The argument is, what can we do to help them? Not as in we folding our hands, because we have signed to it. We have to work towards it. What can we do? As I was saying, they are helping us in where we are lacking. What can we do to also help them in where they are lacking?
In terms of technology, right now we can do absolutely nothing because we haven't developed the technology. But in terms of material, they are getting all their materials from here and they are getting it cheap. So that is something that we are doing. We are making a contribution in that aspect.
Okay, thank you.
Charlotte, we lost you earlier, so if you are here, let's hear from you.
All right, thank you, Prof. Mariam. Dr. Ian, thank you so much for your presentation. Great presentation. I just wanted to add a bit about it. I see that the frameworks you have shared with us is actually targeting governments. I would like to add that yes, government sets the policy and the direction. However, businesses and industries actually drive the agenda. And a little bit of what I know, industries have a challenge when it comes to trying to implement some of the things we beautifully get or put out there as a result from our research. And like Dr. Amponsah mentioned, he was like, maybe this is theory, but practically we may not be able to do that. So I would want to comment that if part of the work you were doing would be to also see how you can support the businesses and industries to be able to implement some of these things that are, yes, government said it, but if they don't have the capacity, the know-how, the awareness to be able to implement some of these things, it will be difficult. And I also want to add to the contribute to the conversation happening that, yeah, we contribute less, so why do we bother ourselves about mitigation? And I want to add that, just as you've been saying, trying to achieve the sustainability and this positive climate action, yes, one part is industries and nations have to remove their negative contribution, which we do less of it. Another part of it is to be able to make positive, regenerative, and restorative impacts to it, which I think that as a continent, as a country, we make a perfect sink for it. That we, like someone was asking, what can we do to help the Western countries to do that? We make a perfect sink. In as much as we have the resources, we also have the capacity to be able to put some of the mitigation strategies in here, because whatever we do to support removing the problem, it can have impact in wherever it can have impact wherever the problem is being caused. So that's the little I want to add. And also, we don't have a choice. Right now, for example, EU has the extended producer responsibility, which mandates all multinational corporations in the in the EU to demand that the businesses they work with in Africa and in other countries actually demonstrate their commitment to climate action before you get access for business linkages with them. And so big companies like Tullow and AngloGold, actually in the vendor assessment, before you become a vendor to do business with them, you have to submit your sustainable development policy. And you need to demonstrate how, as a business, you're removing your own mitigation or your own contribution, no matter how small it is, and how you are contributing positively. So for businesses, it's not only theory. Businesses are now sort of coerced, whether you like it or not, once you want to stay in business, to make sure that you align with these policies and you demonstrate your own commitment. And access to finance has also been tied to it. Now, banks are having ESG compliance as part of their due diligence before you get access to finance. So I think this is brilliant. And then if we decided to fold our hands that we don't want to do anything about it, then definitely our businesses will more or less be affected. And so we need to support the industries and businesses how to be able to comply with these and to also demonstrate their own commitment. So that's what I want to add to the conversation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is great. Now, in terms of businesses, let me respond quickly. In terms of businesses, we have solutions for businesses as well, but this work was targeting the energy transition framework that has been released. So we first of all wanted to look at our national emissions. But in terms of businesses, we do help companies to assess their emissions. We can help companies to develop models for forecasting their emissions. If we have a good contact with them and we know their activities, we can build that into a system that will enable them to be able to monitor their emissions and report it accurately, and even use the data for several other important reporting that are required for business work. So we do that as well. And we are in touch with some oil companies who want to invest in that aspect.
Okay. Who is here? Kwame Sarkodie, your hand is up.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Thanks, Dr. Yen, for the presentation. It's quite an eye-opener looking at the statistics and the model. Just to support with the argument, not to support, but then to just oppose with the argument saying that the industrial sect has created this mess, and why should we clean it up? I think climate change is a global problem. And so even though it has been localized, it becomes a global issue. There's an increase in temperature, and that affects the whole globe. And we must all come together to find a way to mitigate, to solve, to adapt, however we want to attack the situation. In our case, we are limited in terms of funding, but we have the resources. And that is why we need a complete triangle of the government, institutions, and of course, academia to solve the problem of at least providing base technologies that could be developed. And of course, we have these models that are able to predict how we'll be doing in the future so that we can align ourselves so that we don't fall short in the nearest future. So therefore, I feel that it is worth looking at every stage in terms of the predictability of where we would be so that we can position ourselves so that we do not end up in the mess as being an industrial sector in the future. We would have to still be talking about increases in temperatures in the globe and all that. So I think that'll be my contribution to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarkodie.
Is Yusuf around?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, so Dr. Yen, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. But I would like to ask a question. And I think it's important that we play our part as a country and as a continent in achieving net zero globally. But then you made mention of the fact that Africa contributes a very small fraction to the total carbon emissions globally. Okay, but then we are at the receiving end of the horrors of climate change. So I would want to know, as part of your research, do you look at ways as a continent we can protect ourselves from those horrors? I mean, you made mention of the fact that coastal areas are at risk because of rising sea levels, and also our total output in agriculture are declining due to the horrors of climate change. So what are the discussions around the table as a continent in Africa to mitigate some of these things, the effect, let's say, food crisis would have on the continent, and the effects rising sea levels would have as a continent? Because if we only talk about reducing greenhouse emissions, I mean, in this country or in the continent of Africa, it wouldn't really do much, looking at the fraction we contribute to the global output. So what discussions are we putting in place to make sure that we are protected from the horrors of climate change? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think that aspect is what we've referred to as adaptation. Adaptation is very important right now, and I did mention that. I said that adaptation is quite critical because we are at the point where we are experiencing the impact greatly. So we need to invest more into adaptation. And there are a lot of different bodies in Ghana working on adaptation. So the country has made commitments there, and they are working to help the country adapt to some of these challenges that are coming as a result of climate change. But in terms of emission reduction and mitigation, which is where I am coming in as a petroleum engineer, we are more interested in building the technology and the basic infrastructure that are required for us to be able to mitigate emissions, either in the near future, when we get to the point where our emissions are quite significant, okay? And as Dr. Charlotte rightly mentioned, which I also said earlier, now, even if government want to attract investment of any kind, it has to prove that it is fighting climate change by reducing emissions. So that is why government published the Energy Transition Framework in the first place, where it outlines what it will be doing from now to 2070. Okay? It is a requirement to attract investment. It is a requirement for us to also get into the energy transition market. The energy transition market doesn't have a lot to offer for adaptation compared to mitigation. Okay? Because the advanced countries are not adapting. They are not experiencing the same, the impact of climate change at the same pace that we are experiencing it here. Okay? So they are more interested in mitigation, and we have the resources. If we will invest ourselves into that area and develop technology, it will become cheaper for us to develop the technology because we have the material. And we also have the expertise. We have a lot of well-trained engineers around here. And this is all about engineering. Okay? If we position ourselves well, we will get investment to establish carbon sinks. Okay, that is one thing that we already get investment into afforestation and reforestation. We are getting a lot of investment in that area. But in the near future, we will also get investment into other carbon sinks, artificial carbon sinks, such as carbon capture and storage. Because Africa has about 20% of the global storage facility available for CO2 storage. We have that much capacity. Okay, we have 10 times more capacity than the entire of Europe combined in terms of CO2 storage. So these are all resources that we can explore in the near future.
All right, thank you.
Wow, this has been a very exciting discussion with contributions from diverse angles, which I believe can point you to other research directions. But let me ask this question. I believe there's a pooled data over the entire country. You gave us an idea of the sources of emission in terms of agric contributing about 54%, followed by energy and so on and so forth. But are you able to also give some insight on the regional level variations that we have in terms of emission, which regions are high, so that if you have to think of intervention or any mitigation efforts, where to look at?
These data have been published in the EPA report, the source where this data was picked from. Okay, we have all this information in there. Emission data by regions and in terms of distribution, they are all in there. So this is the source. Ghana's 4th National Greenhouse Gas Inventory Report. There's a 5th inventory report that was published last year. The 5th industry inventory report contains data from 1990 to 2019. So you can find that also online, and it will be able to give you the distribution in terms of emission in different parts of the country, even regional. Another database is the World Bank database. Also gives a lot of good information about our emission dynamics. So you might want to check there as well. But I didn't put that into this work because it wasn't what the work was built on.
Do we have more questions? Any more contributions? Other than that, we'll ask you for your final thoughts, and then we'll hand over to Dr. Nkansah.
All right.
Hold on. There's a hand. Let me take from Prince.
Okay.
Looks like we lost.
Hello, everyone.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, I don't know whether what I'm saying is a contribution or a question, but then what I think my fellow guys were saying is that if Africa is contributing, let's say about 3% or less, even if we are able to eradicate the 3% to 0%, okay, the overall effect on the greenhouse gas emission still becomes, our quota becomes insignificant. Because imagine if you have about 100% something, and you are contributing just 3%, and you take the 3% away. I mean, there's still 97% left. So whatever you did on your part, it's not really significant.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can I respond to that for the last time? I mean, I've responded to the question separately, but there's something that I didn't say. Now, we are assuming that Africa is going to continue to contribute 3% for the rest of its life. Okay, for the rest of our time, or as long as time exists, Africa will continue to contribute, let's say, 3% or 4% to the global greenhouse gas emission, which is not true. Okay, our populations are growing. We are increasing in terms of urbanization, and we are determined to industrialize. There's no single African country that is not thinking about industrialization. Okay, so we are industrializing. We are creating more cities. The city of Kumasi alone has almost doubled in the past 15 years. Okay, that is industrialization and urbanization. You go to different parts of the country, you see people starting factories. These are all consuming energy and emitting greenhouse gases. So our emission contribution is not going to even remain 3% in the next 10 years. because the countries that are responsible for about 50% or maybe 80% of emissions today are cutting down on their emissions significantly. Give us 20 years, the dynamics will change. Probably our emissions will go higher than most of these countries. So are you going to wait until that time before you build the right infrastructure for mitigation? That is the whole question. Okay, so it's not about today. Today, we need to mitigate because we need to build the technology for tomorrow. Okay, and we need to take advantage of the market because the market is getting all these resources from us. Finally, because of the climate accord and because we depend on external investment, we need to prove that we are doing something about this to continue to attract investment. There was no single way Ghana could access the IMF fund without proving that we are fighting climate change or at least making efforts to mitigate greenhouse gases. We wouldn't stand a chance of getting it. Okay, so you can go into it and look at all these things. That is what makes this very important. It's not about the quantities we are emitting today. It's about the quantities we will emit tomorrow and the opportunities that presents to us if we make good use of it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tommy's hand is up. That might be our last question for this session.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so this is still a support to the argument that still keeps popping its head. We are saying that you're going to develop technologies now, learn about the problem, so that you can be useful to the world. We are contributing a small amount now, but we have the chance now to build the technologies so that we can hand over and support other parts of the world. What if we build the technologies at a cheaper and a more efficient state, and we're able to hand it to the world? As an example, to say, at the point where we're producing about 3% or whatever insignificant amount as we described, our technologies can handle this and can even do more for the world. So that would represent our contribution. And it doesn't have to be just about Ghana, solving Ghana's 3%, but our contribution to a global crisis, which would get worse if it's being ignored. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sa.
We shall talk about this and humbly ask that you discuss it and share ideas and see how the country this area. We don't have all evening, time is fast spent, so I'll hand over to Professor Marian to give us her closing remarks so that we can close. Hello, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Very well moderated, but I think the presenter, Dr. Adam, has done so well. He did justice to the topic. I'm so impressed. I mean, this is my area of expertise, and I'm so impressed with his presentation. I mean, the take-home message is that we shouldn't just focus on adaptation, but we have the potential to develop the technologies for mitigation and then take advantage of the many benefits associated with mitigation. We are, as a country and as a continent, we are the most vulnerable as a continent, and it's because we depend on climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture, energy, forestry, and the rest. And we also have low infrastructure development, then of course very weaker economy, and then low adaptive capacity. Having said that, we need to have a mix of mitigation efforts and adaptation efforts in our attempt to address climate change. Climate change is with us, and even if today we stop emitting greenhouse gases, for the next several years, we are going to be confronted with the adverse impacts of climate change, because most of the greenhouse gases can stay in the system for several years, 50 years and over. It means that as we seek to mitigate, as we seek to slow down emissions level in an attempt to slow global warming and climate change eventually, we will need to find ways and means to adapt and to live with the adverse consequences that will confront us as a nation, as individuals, as households. So this is a message that we need to take home. And I think as we seek to address climate change, we need to work closely with other partners, other players, including policymakers and the business,
Hello,
the private sector. On that note, I think I want to thank once again the leadership of the Young Researchers Forum and then the speaker for today for giving us such an insightful presentation. I say thank you very much. And on behalf of my office and that of the Young Researchers Forum, we say God richly bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you. Amen. All right. Dr. Kawida was supposed to be a lot of time. If I look at it from has done everything. So get that and call on Dr. Messenger to give us opening. I mean, sorry, the close. Okay. Yeah. Well, if she's not around, then I'll call. Yes. Donetta.
yes,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Kindly give us.
All right, thank you. My internet keeps going back and forth, but I hope you can hear me. Shall we pray? Father, we thank you so much for this meeting. We thank you for insight. Help us to impact the world the way you want us to, not to just be there and, think that we cannot do much, but to know that with your power, we can also forge ahead and create impact. We honor you in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Dr. Adams,
All right.
I've sent my number to you. Give me a call and we can talk, please.
Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Bless you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Hello. Hello. Hello, please, would there be any way of getting a recording for this session?